What if I told you that homophobia wasn't always a thing? In fact, in many ancient societies, same-sex relationships were just a normal part of life. So how did we get from open acceptance to persecution? Let's talk about how homophobia developed over time. In ancient Greece and Rome, same-sex relationships, especially between men, were widely accepted and even institutionalized in certain social settings. In Greece, relationships between older men, erastes, and younger men, eromenos, were common, often seen as a form of mentorship that combined education with emotional and sometimes sexual bonds. This was especially prominent in Athens and Sparta, where it played a role in military and intellectual life. However, these relationships were usually expected to end when the younger partner reached adulthood. In Rome, the acceptance of same-sex relationships was more about power dynamics. Roman men could engage in sexual relationships with male slaves, prostitutes, or younger men, as long as they maintained their dominant masculine role. Passive male partners, especially free Roman citizens, were often looked down upon. Unlike Greece, Rome had stricter social expectations about masculinity and status. Neither civilization had a concept of sexual orientation like we do today. Same-sex activity was just one aspect of broader social and political life. It wasn't until the rise of Christianity that these practices started to be condemned and outlawed. In Japan, particularly within samurai culture, same-sex relationships between men were not only accepted, but also considered honorable. This practice, known as shudo, meaning the way of youth, was a formalized tradition among samurai and Buddhist monks. It typically involved an older, more experienced samurai mentoring a younger apprentice, forming a bond that was both emotional and, at times, sexual. Unlike in many Western societies, these relationships were not seen as shameful or taboo. Instead, they were often praised for fostering loyalty, discipline, and deep personal connections. Many samurai saw shudo as a way to instill virtue, courage, and the warrior spirit in the younger generation. This acceptance began to decline during the late 19th century with the Meiji Restoration, when Japan sought to modernize and adopt Western values, including the more rigid moral attitudes of Christianity. As a result, traditional shudo practices faded and same-sex relationships became increasingly stigmatized under new legal and social norms. In many indigenous cultures around the world, also recognized and accepted diverse gender identities and same-sex relationships long before Western influence imposed rigid gender. In some Native American tribes, the concept of two-spirit people existed, referring to individuals who embodied both masculine and feminine traits. Rather than being marginalized, two-spirit people were often honored as spiritual leaders, healers, and mediators. Their gender and sexual fluidity were seen as gifts rather than something to be punished. Similarly, in pre-colonial Africa, certain societies had traditions that accepted same-gender relationships. For example, in some parts of West and Central Africa, women engaged in same-sex marriages, and male-male intimacy was not uncommon in warrior cultures. The Azandi of Sudan, for instance, practiced same-sex relationships between older warriors and younger men, similar to the Greek erastes eromenos tradition. In South Asia, the Hijra community, recognized for centuries in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, consists of individuals who are neither fully male nor female. They often held spiritual and cultural significance, though their status declined under British colonial rule, which imposed Western religious and legal systems that labeled it as sinful and criminal. Despite this, indigenous and non-Western cultures continue to reclaim and celebrate their historical acceptance of diverse gender identities and sexual orientations. As Christianity began to spread across the Roman Empire in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, its teachings started shaping societal views on sexuality. Early Christian doctrine, especially in the writings of St. Paul in the 1st century CE, emphasized that sexual activity should only take place within a heterosexual marriage. The idea that marriage was a divinely ordained institution meant that any sexual behavior outside of this framework was seen as sinful and unnatural. In his letters, St. Paul condemned unnatural sexual acts, which became central to Christian moral teachings. When Christianity became the state religion of the Roman Empire under Emperor Constantine, in the early 4th century CE, specifically 313 CE with the Edict of Milan, the Church's influence grew significantly. This marked the beginning of a more formalized effort to legislate and enforce Christian values, including those surrounding sexuality. By the late 4th and early 5th centuries, church leaders like St. Augustine of Hippo further reinforced the idea that human sexuality was inherently sinful outside the bounds of heterosexual marriage. The church's power continued to grow through the medieval period, 5th to 15th centuries, during which time religious laws often criminalized any sexual activity not in line with Christian teachings. The concept of original sin, first widely popularized by St. Augustine, became deeply embedded in Western thought, teaching that all humans were born sinful and in need of redemption. By the 16th century, during the Protestant Reformation, figures like Martin Luther and John Calvin continued to uphold Christian views on marriage and sexuality, while the Catholic Church reaffirmed its stance at the Council of Trent, 1545 to 1563. This period marked the entrenchment of Christian sexual ethics in both religious and secular laws. These ideas continued to dominate Western culture and legal systems well into the 19th and 20th centuries, as Christianity remained a central force in shaping attitudes toward sexual orientation, often resulting in the stigmatization or persecution. During the Age of Exploration, European countries like Britain, France, Spain, and Portugal took control of large parts of Africa, Asia, and the Americas. As they colonized these regions, they also pushed their own religious and cultural beliefs onto indigenous populations. Christianity was spread through missionaries who often forced their beliefs on local people. They began to teach that only heterosexual, monogamous relationships were acceptable. The effects of colonial rule are still felt in modern times, especially when it comes to laws against LGBT people. Many of the laws that criminalize same-sex relationships in countries across Africa and Asia have their roots in colonial times. For example, when Britain ruled India, they introduced Section 377, a law that made same-sex relations illegal. This law was then passed on to other parts of the British Empire, including many African nations. Even after these countries gained independence, many kept these colonial laws. The colonial laws are deeply ingrained in legal systems, and these outdated laws continue to harm LGBTQ+ communities. For much of modern history, LGBT people had to hide who they were to survive. In many societies, being openly gay or transgender could lead to imprisonment, forced medical treatments, loss of jobs, or even death. In Nazi Germany, gay men were sent to concentration camps, forced to wear pink triangles, and subjected to brutal experiments. In the mid-20th century, the US and many European countries treated homosexuality as a mental illness, leading to forced lobotomies, electroshock therapy, and conversion therapy. The Lavender Scare of the 1950s saw thousands of LGBT people fired from government jobs in the US for being security risks. Gay bars and secret clubs became the only safe spaces, but even those weren't truly safe. Police often raided them, arresting and exposing people. That's what happened in 1969 at the Stonewall Inn in New York. It was a popular gay bar, and police regularly raided places like it, harassing and arresting people. But on June 28, 1969, the patrons had had enough. They fought back, throwing bottles and bricks, which led to several nights of riots. The Stonewall riots became a turning point, inspiring LGBTQ activism and leading to the first Pride marches. Harvey Milk, one of the first openly gay politicians, pushed for change before he was assassinated. Marsha P. Johnson, a black transgender woman, was on the front lines of Stonewall. When the AIDS crisis hit in the 1980s and 90s, the government ignored it at first, but activists fought to bring attention to it, forcing change. Over time, more people stood up. TV shows, movies, and celebrities helped make their lives more visible. Groups like the Human Rights Campaign, Stonewall UK, and ILJ kept pushing for equality. It took decades of fighting for LGBT people to get legal recognition. The biggest milestone came in 2001, when the Netherlands became the first country to legalize same-sex marriage. They set the stage for other countries like Canada and Spain, and today over 30 countries allow same-sex marriage. While things have improved, many places still have anti-LGBTQ laws, and discrimination hasn't disappeared. In some places, homosexuality is illegal. However, progress has been made, and each step forward brings us closer to a world where everyone can live openly and authentically. The fight for equality continues, and it's up to all of us to keep creating a world where everyone is accepted for who they are.
No matter what happens, someone will love you, and even if you have to find them, Even if they're not your family or even your closest friends, you will find someone that loves you.